Hey guys, Hamsterwheel here with a new video and welcome to my review of the private server called Vanilla Plus. It took a bit longer than expected to make this video due to some PC problems, but hey, better late than never I guess. As of right now, I've put about 75 hours into the server. I have a max level druid that I did some dungeons, some world bosses and molten core with, and besides that character I also have a hunter alt that I'm casually leveling as of right now. So, without further ado, let's talk about this private server that has stolen my heart. So, what is Vanilla Plus? Well, it is a private server that is running on a vanilla core, but they have made a lot of changes. One of the biggest changes are the revamped talent trees that gave every class some very cool abilities to choose from, but it has also made all of the meme specs a lot more viable. For instance, my balanced druid is a lot more powerful than one in classic Season of Mastery. Now, I haven't been able to unlock the full potential yet with my druid, simply because I'm still kinda low geared, so we'll have to see exactly how competitive this class is in raids, but even with this gear, I can already tell the class feels so much stronger and so much more smooth. I have no doubt this is the case for the other classes too, as I've been raiding and doing dungeons with elemental shamans in my group, and they were also pushing out some really impressive numbers. Now, meme specs aren't the only ones that got buffed. Every single class here has gotten buffs, so keep in mind that while you feel stronger, everyone else feels a lot stronger as well. Another thing I'm really happy with is that they revamped a ton of gear so that it becomes more viable. For instance, the dungeon sets no longer just have flat stats, but they have secondary stats like spell damage, spell crit and so on. Even in the lower level dungeons, the blue items have been reworked so it's way easier to get some good amount of spell damage early on. For instance, the Robes of Aragol, which in regular vanilla give you just some base stats, while here it gives you base stats alongside some very nice spell damage. Speaking of spell damage, I also noticed that my spells were doing a lot more damage than the amount of spell damage I had. And after asking around, I found out that intellect has been reworked here as well. You see, every 3 intellect gives you 1 spell damage, which in my mind is pretty darn awesome. Basically, if you have 300 intellect, that alone gives you an extra 100 spell damage, and this means that even run-of-the-mill greens with intellect still give you a decent amount of spell damage, and you can rest assured that even with crappy gear, you can still do some good damage while playing. Of course, there's many more changes to talk about, but first, let's talk about leveling. So, what's it like to level here? Well, when I first started here, the population was very low. It was hovering around 150 people on average, so the zones really did feel kinda empty when I was leveling my druid. Despite that though, there was enough interesting content to keep me going, and the community then, while very small, was tight-knit and very nice. The minute I asked people in world chat some questions, everyone jumped in to help out with whatever I was asking, which was awesome. Of course, now the world feels a lot more alive, with plenty of people now leveling, and the population has seen a massive increase from about 150 people on average to give or take 700 on average as of right now. And I just want to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for giving the server a try and contributing to making the world feel a lot more alive. You guys are awesome. Now, when you first log in, you will also know that Vanilla Plus has embraced the hardcore leveling mode. You get an Iron Man buff, which increases your damage by 5% and reduces your damage taken by 5% as well. Not too shabby, and of course this fades away the moment you die. Also, when you die, there is a server-wide message so everyone can know you messed up, and it's pretty funny to see. Oh yeah, and be careful, as you can actually remove this buff yourself by right-clicking on it. So just keep that in mind. Now, while leveling through the zones, I started to notice some new rare mobs, and Vanilla Plus has added extra rare mobs around the world. Now, an average rare mob in Classic is a mob with maybe a bit more health and damage, and they have an increased chance of dropping greens. Here, however, they have a guaranteed chance to drop green gear, which is super handy if you're leveling and struggling for gear. Just keep in mind that they are also a lot harder to kill. They have a lot more health, they hit like a truck, and some of them even have special abilities like dots, curses, and some even spawn extra mobs. So be careful when you see one. I've seen plenty of people die to those, including me. Speaking of leveling, the pacing is pretty good, as it is 2 times experience rate for kills, 3 times experience rate for completing quests, and get this, 10 times experience rate for completing elite quests. So if you manage to find a group for Ragefire Chasm for instance and get all those quests, you can easily jump 2.5 levels or so by just handing all of those in. This also means it's a really good idea to look for any sort of elite quests where you just have to kill one or a few elite mobs. And with my hunter, I started to create some sort of a leveling route revolving around those elite mobs. If you know where to go and you have some help from other people, you can get to max level very fast. There's even a guy named Lorian on the server who I believe leveled a character in less than a day. I'm thinking about making a leveling guide and make that a separate video, and let me know in the comments section if you'd like to see that. Anyway, back to the leveling. So leveling as a whole went quite smooth, and even if you don't do any elite quests, the 3 times experience rate for quests make it so you still level up quite smoothly. I remember doing all of the quests at the Shimmering Flats when I was in my mid-30s, and man did it feel good handing them all in at once. Another cool thing they added is the increased rested experience generation. Now let me explain. When you park your character at an inn or capital city and log out, you gain rested experience. In Classic, this regeneration is of course pretty slow, and reaching the max rested XP of 1.5 levels takes a long time. On Vanilla Plus, however, you gain rested experience 5 times as fast. When I logged off one evening and logged back in the next day, I easily had almost an entire level of rested experience, and because it's double XP, you now gain 4 times experience from killing mobs, which will make you just fly through the levels. Alright, I think that covers leveling. Let's talk about dungeons. Now, because everyone is stronger here, it also means that the dungeons here are harder. The low level dungeons aren't too bad, but you really start to feel it when you get into the higher dungeons. The first dungeon I did was Zul'Farrak. Now, Zul'Farrak is a dungeon you can normally do when you're level 44. Here, however, it is recommended you're at least level 48 because of the higher difficulty. Zul'Farrak for me was quite easy though, as I was fortunate enough to be boosted by a few 60s. But even then, we still had to watch out for packs of mobs that would just mow us down. And the difficulty really started to dawn on me when we tried our hands at Blackrock Depths. We had a group of 4 60s and I was level 58. Now for a group like that, Blackrock Depths should be pretty easy. But oh boy, did we ever struggle. One boss fight in particular was the Summoner's Tomb, where the mobs there have a lot more health and they hit a lot harder. It got to the point where we had to get help from a tier 1 geared warlock, and then finally we managed to get through there. Of course, the room after with the torches was even harder, and after about 3.5 hours we finally just gave up. So yeah, a simple Emperor run with 4 60s and 1 level 58 took 3.5 hours, and we didn't even get to the final boss. After experiencing Blackrock Depths, I joined an Upper Blackrock Spire run. Now this was at the time I was level 60 and ready to rock as a balance druid. We had a 15-man raid loaded with people who were in full epic gear. And even then, Upper Blackrock Spire kicked our ass. The packs of mobs hit a lot harder and the bosses are very tough. Ren Blackhand, for instance, now also does a whirlwind attack over and over again, and if he isn't kited around properly, he will just take out your clothies in a few seconds. And again, this run took us well over 2.5 hours just to get to Rend, where in Classic an equivalent UBRS run would maybe take an hour, if not shorter. So this is one thing you really have to take into consideration when playing here. While it's really cool to see that you, as a player, are a lot stronger, you have to realize that your enemies are a lot stronger too, and that dungeons take a lot more time than usual. Because of this, Vanilla Plus is in my eyes not so good for the more casual players, since it's harder for them to set aside 4 hours for just one Blackrock Depths run, which in Classic of course takes way less time. And while you might ask, Hamster, aren't you a casual player yourself? Well yes, that's true, which means that unfortunately it's really hard for me to do dungeons here alongside raiding every week, simply because I usually have maybe an hour here and there to play. So just keep that in mind when you decide to commit to this server. The dungeons are a lot more challenging, and they of course also drop loot that has been reworked, but it is also a lot more time consuming. And to be honest with you guys, I think the dungeons here are a bit too overtuned. I mean, a 15-man raid with a bunch of fully geared people that drop like a sack of potatoes and not even the last boss in UBRS? Yeah, that's a little too much if you ask me, and I would like to see the difficulty a bit lower so it's easier for people to gear up, and have the raids like Molten Core be more challenging. But hey, that's just my opinion as a filthy casual. Alright, and then the big one, raiding. So first of all, I did some world bosses with the boys from Mixed Formation. Luckily, the world bosses weren't super hard and they don't take hours to kill. Lord Kazakh still kinda works the same, just decurse and don't let your mana drop below 2k. And get this, Kuranax is now a world boss that patrols from the Alliance Hive to the Horde Hive. Kuranax itself hits a lot harder and still has that sand trap mechanic. Then we tried our hands at Azuragos, and it's kind of the same trick here. Just get out of the blizzard, move when he teleports you, and be wary of that spell reflect. I also can't quite remember if this was the case in Classic, but Azuragos here is immune to arcane damage. So yeah, I was casting Starfire for a bit until I eventually realized that I was doing no damage because he's immune to arcane damage. Then the big one, Molten Core. Now in Molten Core the loot has obviously been reworked as well. Instead of individual tier items dropping, they now have similar items to Zul'Gurub and Naxxramas, where one piece drops that fits multiple classes. Oh yeah, and yes, my UI is still kinda garbage, also cause a lot of add-ons unfortunately do not work here on Vanilla Plus. So I'm having a bit of trouble finding things like raid frames, a proper threat meter, etc. So yeah, please excuse the ghetto UI. So let's say you won one of those tokens. Great, but where do you hand it in? And well, this is also different on Vanilla Plus. You don't just go to some custom vendor in your capital city and there you go. No, in order to hand these in, you need reputation with the Thorium Brotherhood. That's right, so before you can get any tier items, you need to first get friendly with them by doing quests and handing in items. When you hit friendly, you will have to go to Blackrock Depths, and there you will find the NPCs which will give you your tier gear. Speaking of which, it's also worth noting that the tier gear has been reworked here as well. For instance, tier 1 mage gear, which now has a lot better stats with spell hit, and the meme specs now have multiple tier sets. Yep, druids have one for healing, one for spell damage, one for tanking, and one for feral DPS. It's just that freaking awesome, and the balanced tier set is just amazing. And man, I can't wait to be wearing a full set of that gear myself. Hell, you know the shaman tanking meme? Well, it isn't a meme here, it's actually a thing, and shamans have a dedicated tier set just for tanking. I mean, that's just awesome. One more thing to note here is that when you eventually do get a tier token, you also need some extra mats alongside this token in order to get your tier item. And let me tell you, these extra mats are not cheap, so if you're chasing a full tier set, you better prepare to farm some gold for yourself, as one tier item could go for well over 100 gold if you decide to buy all the extra mats from the auction house. Anyway, the raid itself also has a higher difficulty, with the trash mobs having more abilities and hitting a lot harder than normal. For instance, during the core hounds, the tanks had to be spam healed so they wouldn't die, and annihilators and surgers do a lot more damage to the raid. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering why Horde and Alliance are raiding together, the server is indeed cross-faction as of right now. This was mainly to combat the very low population. So what about the bosses themselves? Well, Lucifron and Magmadar honestly felt like they were pretty easy, and they both went down the first try with not too much difference in how they're killed. However, Gar had an extra trick up his sleeve, with Magnetize that knocks people away, so you really have to position yourself that you're not near other people. Gehenna's also throws out a lot more rain of fires, so much in fact that here on the server it seems like constantly kiting him around in Gar's room is the best way to kill him. Baron here now has 2 bombs. The first one is the same one we all know, and the other one is the one where you actually have to stick with the raid. So here it's very important to see what bomb you have. The second bomb also leaves fire on the ground, so you have to move as a whole raid group from position to position, dancing around Geddon as you're trying to bring it down. All these extra tactics and increased health pools also means that raids take a lot longer to clear. Where in Classic you could just zerg the place and be done in no time at all, Molten Core here takes a good amount of time to clear. It's not uncommon that they use 2 nights to fully clear the raid, so once again you have to take into consideration that raiding is more time consuming than it would be in regular vanilla. And finally we ended up at Ragnaros. And Ragnaros is a really annoying encounter. He has a lot more knockbacks that he throws out, as well as fireball volleys. And it got to the point where I was thrown around 3 times in a row, and then I was killed by the lava. So my time participating in this fight was unfortunately rather short. Not just that, he submerges a lot quicker, and while he is submerged, he also heals himself, so it's essential you kill the adds as soon as possible. So yeah, everything considered, Molten Core is in some parts pretty challenging, and it all works quite nicely, though again, it's a lot more time consuming compared to Classic. One last thing I want to mention is that while the team has done a lot to change the world, development for the server right now is kinda stagnant. I mean, the server has been out for quite some time and they're still on Molten Core and Onyxia. And as far as I know, there's no real update on when Blackwing Lair is coming. On their Discord, you can also see that their latest announcement was about 5 months ago. So that's not exactly great when it comes to expecting things of the server in the near future. Alright, so what do I think of the server with all things considered? Well, Vanilla Plus is a server that is definitely a server that I would like to call my home right now. The world of Vanilla is for me just the best, and the added features make for a very interesting experience, especially if you're playing a meme spec. It's a lot of fun because you just keep rediscovering revamped items, custom mobs and so on, and I can't tell you how awesome it is to play a Boomkin and actually be able to do decent damage even in crappy gear. The community seems pretty nice, and the big influx of new players gave this server a second life. Though admittedly, I don't consider this server to be very casually friendly if you're looking to focus on PvE content, as it's a lot harder but also a lot more time consuming. The dungeons and raids have a higher difficulty and take more time to clear, not to mention the extra hoops you have to jump through in order to get your tier set. That and the stagnant development is a little worrying, because at some time this server really needs a new raid, be it Blackwing Lair or something custom, else people might get bored of only having world bosses and Molten Core plus Onyxia available. For now though, I can definitely recommend this server if you're looking for a more drastically changed version of Vanilla. And I'll even go as far as to say that in my humble opinion, this is what Season of Mastery should have been like. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching this video. I'm Hamsterwheel and have a good one.